guys, it's Casey, and today we're going to talk about the books I read in the month of October. So October was not my greatest month, not that it's a competition or anything, but I only managed to read 6 books kind of in the month of October. So I gave myself a pretty light TBR for October just because I knew that I had a ton going on, and oh boy did I ever, but I still wasn't able to manage the entire TBR. So checking back in with it, I told myself I had to read my 4 required books, which I did mostly manage to do. I also wanted to continue with the Dresden Files this month, and I wanted to read Final Girls by Riley Sagar. So I did not end up getting to Final Girls, sadly, because I was really looking forward to that as it was a thriller in the month of October, but unfortunately that one didn't happen. Other than that though, I did manage to do most of the things on my TBR, and like I said, I did all of the required books. Technically I finished the last one on November 1st, but we're just gonna count it. So this month I had 1 5-star, 3 4-stars, and 2 3-star books. So the first book I read in the month of October was Small Favor by Jim Butcher, which was book 10 to the Dresden Files. So I've been reading the Dresden Files since I think June at this point. I've been reading about 2 a month, and I've been loving it the entire time, mostly. So obviously I can't give you a lot of details since this is book 10 in the series, but broadly speaking, the series follows Harry Dresden, who is a wizard for hire, as he works as a private investigator and with like the Chicago PD to help sort of solve all manner of supernatural crimes. And it's kind of like a detective noir mystery of the week kind of a series, but it's, as we progress, it's slowly expanding into a much broader, cohesive, awesome story, honestly. So Small Favor, I ended up giving 4.5 stars. I really loved it. It brought back some characters that I thought were really interesting and started to kind of weave some plot threads that are definitely gonna go into some really intriguing places. I don't know why I didn't give this one a full 5. It just like didn't quite hit that level for me. It just didn't quite do it. But it was definitely one of my favorite entries in the series up until this point. I did really enjoy it. And while we're here, I might as well talk about Turncoat, which is book 11 to the Dresden Files, which I read later on in the month, but we'll just group it together. Turncoat, I gave 5 stars immediately after closing the audiobook because I had to. Turncoat was amazing. A lot of stuff got kind of woven back in. Things are starting to fall into place. It's becoming more and more clear what this overarching kind of plot is that's been going on essentially since the first book and has kind of been slowly woven through. We're starting to get to that point where it's all coming out, and oh, it's so good. I loved it. I cried, honestly. 5 stars just immediately. It's my favorite one probably in the whole series so far, and I've heard from other like booktubers and things like that that book 12 changes is where things really start to kind of tip into just amazing and just mind-blowing, and I'm so excited and I'm so scared. So the next book I read this month was Ghostland by Colin Dickey. And so this was my nonfiction pick of the month, and I listened to the audiobook for it. So it is sort of a tour of America's most haunted places. So it takes a look at some really famous haunted, like historical landmarks in the United States and talks about kind of the history of them and what sort of like the surrounding myths are about all of them. And I gave this book 3 stars. I liked it. It didn't do anything special for me, but I think that could have been because I wasn't super interested or super knowledgeable on the subject matter. I picked it because I wanted to do kind of a spooky nonfiction book for October, and I don't know a lot about like haunted places or ghost stories or things like that. That's not usually like an area I'm super interested in, so I thought it might be cool to learn about them. And while a couple of the areas I had heard about, like for example they talk about like Salem for part of it, I didn't know a huge amount about these places going into it, and while I found some aspects of the history to be interesting, it wasn't written in a way that like gripped me and was really very entertaining. And I think maybe if I had more invested in the subject matter to begin with, so if that was something I was already interested in, maybe this would have done more for me. But at the same time, I feel like if this is something that you're interested in, this would have been information that you were already pretty familiar with. It would have been like that cursory level. So I don't really know necessarily who this book is aimed at, but I don't think it was me. Like, I enjoyed it. I did learn some things, but it just didn't really do it for me. So overall, 3 stars. So next I read Harrow the Ninth by Tamsin Muir, and I'm still not 100% sure what to rate this book. So Harrow the Ninth is the second book in the Locked Tomb trilogy and the sequel to Gideon the Ninth, which I read back in June or July, something like that. And I originally gave Gideon the Ninth 3 stars. Part of that was because I felt like it was pretty confusing and I wasn't in a place in June to kind of give all of the attention to it that it deserved, and it kind of wasn't what I was expecting from that book. So I thought, with my expectations adjusted, more mental space to devote to figuring it out, that maybe Harrow the Ninth would do it for me a little bit more. And it kind of did, but it didn't blow me away. So I think I'm gonna settle on like a very high 3-star or a 4-star for this book. Let's just call it 4 stars. Because this book did some really, really interesting stuff. Like, I thought the writing in this and like what they tried to do was absolutely incredible. So without getting into any spoilers, this is written from Harrow's perspective, and you kind of realize that something is wrong, that the way she's recalling events from the first book is not correct. There are things missing, things aren't right, and you can really get that unsettled feeling of being in Harrow's head with things being wrong. So a lot of this book is written in second person, so it really feels like you are Harrow. So the narration talks about how you did this and you did that, and you can really feel the wrongness, and it's a very unsettling feeling like you are remembering the events of the first book in a corrupted way. And I thought that that was so interesting and so well done, and I loved that aspect of it. And I really liked the characters that we knew that carried over from the first book. Some of the characters that were introduced in the second book I didn't get as attached to and I didn't like as much. But the thing that's keeping me from giving this like a better rating is, again, I felt like I was lost for most of this. I've heard that this is a relatively common complaint, so maybe it's not just me not getting some of the story, but I felt like I was completely lost until about the last little chunk of this book when the pieces kind of started to fall together. And I don't mean that in like a, oh, the plot twist happened and everything started to make sense kind of a way. I mean, I genuinely couldn't follow the events of the book sometimes, and it was really confusing as to what was happening. It was all pretty abstract, and I just didn't get it a lot of the time. And I know that part of that is an artifact of trying to make you feel like you're losing your mind, but also I had that same complaint with the first book. So I feel like at a certain point it is just kind of a feature of the series that I'm going to feel really lost with the plot and kind of what's happening, and it was to the point that it detracted from my enjoyment. Until about like the 70% mark, I wasn't looking forward to picking this book up because I didn't feel like I needed to know what happened next, right? Like, I didn't feel propelled through the plot. However, I do remember that I talked to multiple people about how cool I thought the perspective and the writing was of this book. So on one hand, this book did some really awesome stuff, but on the other hand, like, I just also didn't get it for a while. So I think I'm gonna land on a flat 4 stars for this one. I think I did enjoy it more than Gideon the Ninth. I really liked it. I thought it did some amazing stuff, but I was just lost for the majority of it. If you didn't feel that way about Gideon the Ninth, if you felt like you were able to keep up, first of all, explain to me how, because I was lost. But if you were, this one might not be as much of a problem for you. You might be able to kind of keep pace with a lot of that more, in which case I would definitely recommend that, because that was my biggest complaint about this book, was that I was just lost for a lot of it. So the next book I read this month was Howls Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. And I gave this book 4 stars. I thought it was so cute. I really, really enjoyed it. So I had never read this before or seen the movie, which I've heard is pretty different from the way things happen in the book, although I'm looking forward to seeing it. So this book follows Sophie, who is the oldest of 3 sisters, and one day she kind of pisses off the Witch of the Wastes, who turns her into an old woman. Searching for someone to help break the curse that she can't tell anyone about, she stumbles across the wizard Howl, who lives in his moving castle. She barges into the castle, essentially demanding to see him, and makes a deal with the fire demon in the hearth, saying that if she can break the pact that he has with the wizard Howl, that he will tell Howl about the curse that is placed on Sophie and get him to break it. And this kind of follows her adventures trying to force herself into Howl's life and his goings on to try to make sure that she is around to fulfill her end of the bargain. And it was so cute. I really enjoyed it. It had this very like fairy tale, fable kind of feeling to it, while being like a very whimsical and fun romp. I really liked it. I loved the characters in this book. I thought that the main cast of characters was really well fleshed out. I loved Sophie. I loved Howl. I loved Michael. I loved Calcifer. It was all really great. Some of the side characters were just kind of whatever, but the main cast was really good. And I just got a very magical, whimsical, feel-good feeling from this book overall. and I really enjoyed it, so 4 stars. And the last book that I read in the month of October, although I technically finished it the morning of November 1st, is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. So this is obviously a pretty famous classic that I thought would be nice to read during Halloween. I ended up giving this 3 stars. I liked it, but it wasn't all that special to me. It was a classic, so I had a little bit of a hard time connecting with it and connecting with some of the language of it. Like, how do I review classics while sounding remotely intelligent? I don't know. Overall, I felt like I enjoyed the themes that Mary Shelley put forth in this. Some of the format I didn't like. There were a lot of letters back and forth, and some of the parts that I thought were more interesting were kind of glossed over at the beginning, and then we spent a long time looking at the grief and the guilt of Frankenstein himself, and then sort of flipping over to the grief and the guilt of Frankenstein's monster. And while I thought some of the dichotomies and the way that their experiences ended up kind of ultimately being very similar to each other's was really interesting, I just wasn't that interested simultaneously. It didn't do anything for me, and this isn't just like all classics in general. Like, for example, Animal Farm I enjoyed a lot more, and there have been classics in the past that I've liked more than this, but I had a lot of trouble like connecting with this story. I enjoyed the themes, I thought they were super well done, but I just didn't really feel that much when I read this book, so overall I just went with 3 stars. And that's it! That is all I read in the month of October. October was a little bit of a slow month for me. Didn't make it through as much as I wanted because I knew I'd be super busy, but stick around because November is going to be a truly wild time. But I think that's all I've got for you guys, so if you want to keep up with what I'm reading, I've got a link to my Goodreads in the description below, but other than that, I'll see you guys next time!